Hi, my name is Meg Brady, and I'm the director of YourStory, Record and Remember, a program to record life stories based in Salt Lake City, Utah. After 10 years of recording the stories of individuals and many different groups in Utah, the YourStory program now focuses primarily on preserving the stories of patients at the Huntsman Cancer Hospital and those in hospice care. This is the second in a series of training videos that we use at Huntsman and that those working in hospice or palliative care might find useful in creating a similar program to record their patients' life stories. In this video, we'll be focusing on compassionate listening skills and how each of us can become more attentive listeners in any situation. The video is geared especially for those who are engaged in listening to and recording oral autobiographies. Listening is an act of love. When we listen with our hearts and not just our ears, we bring to bear all the values we've already discussed in the first video in this series. We offer the opportunity to be heard, really heard, without interruption or judgment or competition. In our hurry-up world, we're all guilty of distracted listening, and that prevents us from listening deeply. Distractions can come from our exterior physical environment, as the photo here suggests, but they can also arise internally as well. We interrupt each other, react, take things personally. We jump to false conclusions, and we rehearse what we're going to say next while the other person is still talking. Distracted listening is like having two radio stations on at the same time. We can't hear either clearly, and there's a lot of static. Researchers at the Kavli Institute for Systems Neuroscience and Center for the Biology of Memory at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology have discovered a mechanism that the brain uses to filter out distracting thoughts to focus on a single bit of information. Their results are reported in the November 19, 2010 issue of the journal Nature. The human brain is bombarded with all kinds of information, from the memory of last night's delicious dinner to the instructions from your boss at your morning meeting. But how do you tune in to just one thought or idea and ignore all the rest of what is going on around you until it comes time to think of something else? The human brain is bombarded with all kind of information, from the memory of a dream you had when you were 6 years old to the story your coworker told at this afternoon's staff meeting. But how do you tune in to just one thought or idea and ignore all the rest of what's going on around you until it comes time to think of something else? Researchers at the Kavli Institute suggest that in fact your brain is very like the radio we spoke of just a few minutes ago. Imagine turning the knob on that brain radio to find your favorite station, but the knob gets stuck and you find yourself listening to something that's just in between stations. It's a frustrating combination that makes it quite hard to get an update on the measles outbreak at Disneyland while a Taylor Swift song wavers in and out. Staying on the right frequency is the only way to really hear what you're after. In much the same way, the brain's nerve cells are able to tune in to the right station to get exactly the information they need, says researcher Laura Colgan, who was the paper's first author. Just like radio stations play songs and news on different frequencies, the brain uses different frequencies of waves to send different kinds of information, she says. Colgan and her colleagues measured brain waves in rats in 3 different parts of the hippocampus, which is a key memory center in the brain. While listening in on the rat brainwave transmissions photographed here, the researchers started to realize that there might be something more to a specific subset of brain waves called gamma waves. Researchers have thought these waves are linked to the formation of consciousness, but no one really knew why their frequency differed so much from one region to another and from one moment to the next. If you think of the example of the jammed radio, the way to hear what you want out of the messy signals would be to listen really hard for the latest news while trying to filter out the unwanted music. The hippocampus does this more efficiently. It simply tunes into the right frequency to get the station it wants. As the cells tune into the station thereafter, they are actually able to filter out the other station at the same time because its signal is being transmitted on a different frequency. The cells that tune into different wavelengths work like a switch, or rather like zapping between radio stations that are already programmed into your radio. The cells can switch back and forth between different channels several times a second. The switch allows the cells to attend to one piece at a time, sorting out what's on your mind from what's happening and where you are at any point in time. The researchers believe this is an underlying principle for how information is handled throughout the brain. The researchers' results suggest that the brain is a lot more flexible than previously thought. Among the thousands of inputs to a given brain cell, the cell can choose to listen to some and ignore the rest, and the selection of inputs is changing all the time. Information is carried on top of gamma waves, just like songs are carried by radio waves. These carrier waves transmit information from one brain region to another. We found that there are slow gamma waves and fast gamma waves coming from different brain areas, just like radio stations transmit on different frequencies, Colgan says. You really can be on the same wavelength. You know how when you feel like you really connect with someone, you say you're on the same wavelength? When brain cells want to connect with each other, they synchronize their activity, Colgan explains. The cells literally tune into each other's wavelength. The researchers investigated how gamma waves in particular were involved in communication across cell groups in the hippocampus. She goes on, "What we found could be described as a radio-like system inside the brain. The lower frequencies are used to transmit memories of past experiences, and the higher frequencies are used to convey what is happening where you are right now." So what does this latest research mean for our own listening abilities? In order to let the brain cells do their work and filter out the distractions, thereby focusing on what is most important, there are certain strategies that support the work of the hippocampus. Rather than letting the words of a person we're listening to make a direct beeline to the brain, we're often distracted. We're thinking about whether or not we fed the cat, or about the errands we have to do on the way home. Even when we think we're listening, we often process what another person is saying based on what's already in our minds, an association, a concept, or belief, thus allowing the distraction to tune out the storyteller, if only briefly. This is what has been called effortful listening. Instead of listening without expectations or assumptions, we get stuck in our own personal reality and belief system. By judging and evaluating, we essentially hear only our own thoughts. Instead of feeling connected, we wind up spacey, distant, defensive, or anxious. Compassionate listening, or deep listening, healing listening, sacred listening, reflective listening, whatever you call it, is different from everyday conversation in a number of ways. Deep listening is really being with another. You're in a state of presence where your mind isn't cluttered with past judgments or thoughts of the future. You feel no urgency or impatience, and you let go of beliefs and prejudices you may have about the other person. It's like listening casually to your favorite music, the sound of a rushing stream or a bird singing. You're not analyzing it or figuring it out. You're simply letting the feelings and sounds touch you, bringing you as listener onto the same wavelength as the teller. The way we listen can actually allow the other person to bring forth what is true and alive in them. Listening is a creative force. Listening well takes time, skill, a readiness to slow down, to let go of expectations, judgment, boredom, self-assertiveness, and defensiveness. Listening deeply takes practice. Think for a moment about how you can tell that someone is really listening to you. What lets you know that you are being heard? Perhaps some of the things you listed can be thought of as general listening skills, often more like techniques or mechanics. Things like eye contact, looking directly at the speaker, body language such as leaning in towards the other person, smiling, and making sure not to interrupt because you value what the speaker is saying too much to interfere with the completion of a thought or story. These are what we might think of as the rules of good listening. But there are also some specific ways to actually practice listening within our own lives. There are 3 particular qualities that are necessary for us to develop and nurture the listening skills that are so important in facilitating life story recording. Silence, reflection, and presence. I love this photograph because it's so illustrative of the discomfort with silence in our culture. In fact, many times conversational rules say we must absolutely fill any silence with words. Think how uncomfortable people often are on an elevator when no one is talking. Someone often steps up to fill the void and ease the tension that results from such silence by making an often inane comment or joking self-consciously. But silence gives us breathing room where we can become centered within ourselves. I sometimes find that driving without the radio on gives me time for that all-important silence. Try to think now of some ways you might be able to pay attention to and value silence in your own life. Reflection is a second tool in developing the art of listening. Taking time to acknowledge what happens in our lives and why. Whether you write a journal, take a long walk, have a really meaningful conversation with a friend, or quiet time alone, the act of self-reflection gives ourselves permission to do nothing except begin to listen to what is really in our own hearts. Presence is the third tool. In deep listening, we listen to understand, not to agree or disagree or believe. We are listening from the heart and to the heart, in appreciation of the other for who they are and who they are revealing themselves to be through their stories. Being open and waiting patiently for the other to speak what is in their heart is the act of presence. Sacred space is created between two people where the conversation slows down. By becoming present to the other, each feels safe to speak what's in their heart. You might be asking now, yeah, sure, that's a nice idea, but how do I nurture this idea of mindful presence and spaciousness in actual practice? I have a friend who practices the art of presence when brushing her teeth each morning and evening. You might think that's a funny idea, but rather than trying to communicate through the toothpaste or letting her mind race through her to-do list, simply brushing in silence and focusing on the act itself allows her to practice being present to the present moment. You can probably think of other daily tasks where focusing on being present could be useful for you. Now, after practicing with the listening tools of silence, reflection, and presence, and before an opportunity for compassionate listening, it's important to listen first to what is in your own heart. Ask, what's going on in my life right now that might get in the way of deep listening? What am I worried about? What issues have been arising for me lately? What's particularly hard for me these days? In this way, you clear the decks by listening to yourself. After this little review, you can leave your own baggage outside the door for the amount of time that you have carved out for compassionate listening. Make space inside so that you can be open to receive the other. Take some time now away from this video to really clear the decks, to listen to your heart, and then leave your baggage outside. Now have a real conversation with someone close to you. Do you notice any difference in the communication? In what ways have you been able to be more present to the other person than usual? Okay, push pause and do this important experiment. Try this as many times as you can in the next few days. Now, when you begin listening to another, you can approach that time together as a moment of interconnectedness rather than as an opportunity to solve the other person's problems or create some kind of resolution. Deep listening does not ask that of you. In fact, it asks the opposite, to simply hear what is said from the heart. This kind of listening has to do with being rather than doing. We listen not to help someone, but to simply be with them, to stay with them a while, perhaps to approach understanding them, not to offer insight or advice. So now, let's review some of the principles of compassionate listening. First of all, bring no personal agendas. It takes practice for us to loosen our attachment to our own agendas. How many times have we been in conversations with others and feel the need to move the conversation in a particular direction to accomplish our own goals? Remind yourself, this is not about me. My goal is to listen to and for the speaker, not to advance my own ideas or correct any perceived misconceptions. The second principle of compassionate listening is to suspend assumptions and judgments. As you listen, hear each voice as unique, distinctive, individual. Suspend assumptions and judgments and the assumption that you know what's coming next. How many times do you find yourself jumping in to provide a word or a piece of a story when another is speaking? I do it all the time. Even when we think we're listening, we often process what another person's saying based on what's already in our minds, an association, concept, or belief. We've talked about this earlier. In a conversation after recording Dr. David Moore's life story, he revealed a particularly important insight about listening without judgment. Dr. Moore was a medic in World War II, and he told me that many men are reluctant to talk about their experiences in combat. I asked him about that reticence and about what we could do to help these veterans.
So I've been aware that this problem is especially present among GIs. That's why they never talk about. They'll maybe go 50 years and they don't want to talk about this. As a docent at the museum, every once in a while get a veteran. I could get him. He's a BAR man. I show him the prototype of the BAR and get him to talk about his experience in the service. And he just dumps all this out and he's talk. His family is likely to say, "Dad, you never told us any of this sort of stuff." So that's a problem. Dumping it out isn't easy. And for me to dump it out, I've been aware it wouldn't be easy. So, talk.
And you think it's that the problem for the veterans is what exactly?
Kind of this feeling surely they could have done more than they did. They may have done a good job, but for some reason this neurosis says it wasn't all you could have done. And I can't remember any instance when I did do the best I could do. It's still that illogical part of your conscientious brain. It says, but couldn't you have done more?
What do you think would help veterans who have that feeling?
It would help to just talk to a disinterested person. Most people will jump in and say, well, but forget it, don't do this. Don't worry about you. And they talk too much. You're a good listener, and that's what it takes. You're not at all judgmental. All you do is sit there and listen as if you're interested.
I am.
And and that's just like the old psychiatrist taught us to do. Just listen.
Interestingly, Dr. Moore's wife, who's working in the kitchen nearby and heard this conversation, came over to him and asked, "Well, why haven't you ever told me about what you did during the war?" I think he was probably wise not to answer that question before going on to speak of other matters. His comments, though, shed light on the incredible importance of refraining from judging or making assumptions about the words and lives of others. Perhaps writer Khalil Gibran put the results of such compassionate listening best when he wrote, "You listen to so much more than I can say. You hear consciousness. You go with me where the words I say can't carry you." The third principle of compassionate listening is focus. We spend about 45% of our time listening, but we are distracted, preoccupied, or forgetful 75% of that time. The average attention span for adults is 22 seconds. I wonder how that affects your response to this training video. When you go to record a life story, take a break from multitasking. Your job right now in this place with this person is to simply focus, to listen with your whole mind, body, and spirit, even if it's only for a very brief time. How often these days do you see a couple sitting together in a restaurant, both with their cell phones out, texting away, and trying to speak with each other at the same time? This seems like the ultimate opposite of focusing to me. It's a good idea to practice this kind of focus in daily life. Stop what you're doing when a friend or family member talks to you. It's often harder than you think, mainly because we're so out of practice. Another good idea I learned from a friend is to practice refocusing. Take 1 or 2 minutes before getting out of the car, before and after work, to center yourself on what is happening right now. Again, be mindful of the task at hand and be committed to it as fully as possible. In healing listening, we need to establish a quiet, mindful presence within and without. Fourth, a compassionate listener pays attention to the nonverbal dimensions of what the speaker is saying. We've already seen how the listener's body language can let the speaker know that she or he is listening, but the storyteller's own body language also reveals important clues about the meaning of the words he or she is speaking. In paying attention to nonverbal communication, we need to rely on our eyes as much as our ears. Research has shown that well over half the meaning of spoken messages comes from that which can only be seen, how the speaker looks and moves. About a third comes from what the ear can pick up, tone of voice, rhythm of words, and rate of speaking. It's even more important, then, to understand the meaning behind the words. The human face can display more than 8,000 expressions and do so in a fraction of a second. How good are you at reading facial expressions? What about reading body position, gestures, and something we might call nonverbal attitude? All of these will be important to recognize as you move into recording life stories. The fifth principle of compassionate listening might be the title of this entire presentation. Listen with your third ear. We have the capacity to listen beyond what is spoken. This comes from our third ear. The idea of the third ear originated with Friedrich Nietzsche and was later adapted by psychiatrist Theodor Reich. They spoke of the invisible ear that can hear what your physical ear cannot. Have you ever had the sense that you knew what another was feeling, even if he didn't tell you directly? Something intuitive within you somehow knew. These intuitive feelings come ever so subtly, on glances, minute body movements, tone of voice, and so on. Here again, being able to process these clues with the third ear allows you to become truly on the same wavelength as the person you're listening to. We must be open to these unspoken messages. Listening with the third ear and with the heart means focusing on feelings, those things that are truly heartfelt. The sixth principle of compassionate listening is to listen with and to your whole body. This refers to the ability to pay attention to what's happening within you as you listen, to the subtle sensations, tension, sleepiness, butterflies. Your own body can give you clues to the emotional state of the other person, too. These sensations can alert you to such things as a realization that you need to conclude the recording session for the day because you may be just too tired to listen fully anymore. Or your reaction to a particular story may be most fully felt in your own chest. Have you ever felt another's heartbreak as they speak of a death of someone close to them? Or perhaps you get a lump in your throat as you listen to that story. Listening compassionately implies being attentive to the way your own body may be reflecting the feelings of the speaker. Number 7, let go. Let go of your own will so you can follow the lead of the other's will as it relates to the communication between you. Let go of any attempt to control the other person. One way in which a good listener needs to let go is to hold back in sharing your own experience. Allow yourself to be completely engrossed in the one who is speaking, being supremely attentive. This is the gift you have to offer. You also need to let go of any attempt to direct the course of the storytelling. Being sensitive to just how much the speaker wants and or needs to control the flow of the story is a delicate matter. One day I recorded a gentleman who wanted absolutely no help in facilitating his life story. After I recorded a brief standard introduction to our session, he began speaking immediately, and he did not stop for one. We've already briefly mentioned the 8th principle of compassionate listening, welcome silence. But I want to move this discussion to an additional understanding of the role of silence within the life story facilitation process. It's especially important for a good listener to not interrupt the teller's story by rushing in to fill any silence. Sometimes the prompts we use require a good deal of thought on the part of the storyteller before memories emerge in a full-blown story. I always suggest slowly counting to 10 before inserting a clarifying question for the teller to respond to. Silence reaches toward the speaker and asks, "Do you have more to say? Please, go ahead." This easygoing stillness tells the other that he or she can say whatever they want and it will be accepted, just as they will be. Remember to unite your silence with your attention and your caring. Recently, I've noticed that in the recordings I've been doing lately, over 10 years since I began the YourStory project, I speak far less than I did at the start of this endeavor. It's really a dramatic difference. Instead, I allow pauses and silence to fill spaces that earlier I would have jumped into with a new question at the ready. And it's remarkable how much more the storytellers have to say when I do this. I noticed also that my nonverbal responses are becoming even more important as that silence reigns. Flexibility is a principle of compassionate listening that underlies all the others. Being flexible in applying each of the other principles should be a given, but there are other aspects of flexibility as well. Flexibility is a principle of compassionate listening that underlies all the others. Being flexible in applying each of the other principles should be a given, but there are other aspects of flexibility as well. Flexibility also means allowing yourself to adapt to the speaker. How loudly or softly does he speak? How directly does she talk about feelings? What amount of silence is really comfortable? Flexibility gives a clear. Finally, the 10th principle of compassionate listening is to take your time. Don't hurry. Deep listening requires patience. Listeners can process verbal information 3 times as fast as their counterparts normally talk. Eliciting stories from our patients and listening to them wholeheartedly is powerful. Cancer and In concluding, I'd like especially to thank all those individuals who have recorded their stories over the last 10 years. You've only heard a small fraction of their voices in this video, but I can tell you that each and every story is worth hearing over and over again. I'd also like to thank my students at the University of Utah, the staff of the Wellness and Survivorship Center at Huntsman Cancer, Dean Robert Newman of the College of Humanities, and Ray Lynch, the CEO of Huntsman Cancer Hospital, who have been so supportive of the work of YourStory from the beginning. I look forward to meeting you again in the next video in this training series. This is the nuts and bolts of the whole recording process, and I think you will enjoy learning some of the strategies we use to record the stories of our patients. See you soon.